Hello, welcome to the Self Learning Podcast by Dr. Sushma Singh. Let us start discussion on Unit 6 Political Economy of Development. And our topic is some important aspects of the political economy, theories of development. Compared to the mainstream economic theories of development, the PED takes a rigorous, historical, and deep rooted view of the genesis, accentuation, and perpetuation of the adverse and but avoidable state of affairs most of the world is facing in the diverse forms, particularly the citizens of the countries of Asia, Africa, Latin America, as well as the poor in the rich countries. In fact, at one level, certain nations are finding themselves in such unenviable positions. At another level, it is the great majority of the individuals and the variously constituted groups and classes who have been disempowered. The theories of development have to find common ground in the midst of this diversity so that theories can become applicable to each one of the specific situation in its historical conjuncture. Thus, the theories of development are concerned equally with the fate, status, and functioning of the people, the institutions, and the values in the rich as well as the poor countries in their international interaction, as well as to the internal relationships and dynamics within the countries. Unlike the ahistorical and linear view of lack or inadequacy or distortion of development, especially in terms of the inadequacy and lack of proportion between the different factors of production, capita versus the labor force, and the lower productivity vintage of the technology embodied in the available capital, which is treated as a kind of situation akin to pre or prior state of the present day so called developed countries. The PED takes an historical view of the socio-economic conditions of the different people and countries as a product of the then prevailing conjuncture of resources, technology, institutions, values, and attitudes. According to such a perspective, many of the present day poor countries were on the then prevailing front line, especially China and India, etc., while the North was far behind. Thus, the question becomes why, how, and when the reversal of roles, situation, and status, or in one word, relative national power came about, rather than do the ahistorical and unrealistic exercise of backward extrapolation of present levels of GDP and population and work out the developmental lags of various poor countries versus the presently rich industrialized countries. A concomitant feature is that, similar to the international differentiation and disparities and relative disempowerment, there took place an exacerbation of similar traits domestically, especially in those countries which lost out and became laggard internationally. This factor too calls for an explanation logically and historically in a manner interlinked with the international phenomena. This approach and procedure also has the implication of avoiding the ethnocentric or north-centric trap of defining the developmental state of the countries dubbed underdeveloped as the mirror image of the not too distant past of the present rich countries. This model of imitative catching up development or industrialization denies the role of history, culture, freedom, or independence. Natural endowments, changing geopolitical factors, and the independent processes of adaptation and development of technologies of the countries who could not become the early beginners on the path to the so called modernity and came to be dominated and dependent. Historically, analysis of the proto-industrialization, agrarian changes, industrial revolution, political and military hegemony of the Western countries, especially their maritime capabilities and power, along with the active developmental role of the mercantilist state, which played a big role in primitive or prior accumulation of capital, culture, social and religious transformations, political upheavals, changing the socio-political balance of power, etc. In Europe, spread over a period of time. Some 5 centuries were critical to the emergence of technological breakthroughs during the 18th and 19th century, which heralded the era of modern economic growth and growing inequalities nationally and internationally. The political, economic, and cultural domination of African, Asian, including India, and Latin American countries was not simply the other side of these changes in international relations, as the domestic situation in these countries too contributed to their subordination. The way Japan escaped this misfortune of domination and denial owing to internal dynamics underscores the suggestion that the global factors were actively assisted or worked in conjunction with the domestic factors. It is too complex and lengthy a subject to go into the processes which empowered some countries while impoverishing and subjugating a much larger number of countries and an overwhelmingly large number of their people. Empirical studies along some such lines for each country have to be undertaken. The main point is that it was a combination of diverse factors which, in an interrelated manner, created the great jam among nations and peoples within the nations, leading to prosperity for some and penury for the many. The long-term impact of these processes and their unwholesome outcomes for the poor countries was seen in the form of stifling of the positive symbolic linkages between various aspects of their social existence in the poorer countries, leading to worsening material, cultural, and socio-political conditions. They became declining countries with impoverished and disempowered people. Now let us wind up the session and take rest. Thank you very much for engaging yourself with the self learning podcast.